There's an old building in Russia with a basement that people were afraid to enter, not because of what they could see, but because of what they claimed they could hear coming from underneath the floor. Then, one day, something was discovered beneath the building, a hidden space buried underneath the floor, and what was found down there raised a terrifying question. Why had this place been hidden in the first place? But the basement wasn't the only strange thing. People living nearby began noticing something even harder to explain. Footsteps appearing in the snow with no one there to make them. Then there was the door, a heavy metal door at the end of an abandoned corridor. People said they could sometimes hear movement behind it, even though the room was supposed to be empty. And when investigators finally looked deeper underground, they found something that made the entire story even stranger, because whatever had been happening beneath this building may have started long before anyone knew it was there. And tonight, we're going to find out what was really hidden in that basement. The backstory. To understand why places like this exist, you have to understand a little about Russia's past. Across the country, especially around old Soviet-era cities, there are countless abandoned buildings, underground storage areas, shelters, utility tunnels, and basements. Some were built for practical purposes. Some were connected to factories. Others were designed as shelters during the Cold War, and when buildings were abandoned, many of these underground spaces were simply sealed off and forgotten. But forgotten doesn't always mean empty. Over the years, locals began telling stories about strange sounds coming from beneath certain abandoned buildings, metal doors opening by themselves, footsteps, whispering, and occasionally knocking. 3 knocks, then silence, 3 more. Nobody could explain where the sounds were coming from, but eventually, one particular basement became the center of a much darker story. The descent. Imagine standing at the top of those stairs. There's no sunlight down there, only darkness. Your flashlight cuts through the dust for a few feet before disappearing into blackness. You take one step, then another. The temperature drops, not dramatically, just enough for you to notice. The walls are damp. The air smells old, like concrete, rust, and something that has been trapped underground for far too long. And then you hear it, a sound from somewhere below. Knock. You stop. Silence. Then, knock. This time, it sounds closer. You shine your flashlight toward the bottom of the stairs. Nothing. Just an old door standing slightly open. And that's where the story gets strange. Because according to the legend, people who explored abandoned basements like this sometimes found evidence that the place had been used long after everyone believed it was abandoned. Old objects, personal belongings, marks on the walls, and rooms that didn't appear on any obvious building plans. But there was something even more disturbing. A door that seemed to lead somewhere that shouldn't exist. The door opens into a narrow corridor. The walls are covered in peeling paint. There are no windows, no electrical lights, nothing. You walk forward. Your footsteps echo through the hallway. Then you notice something. Your footsteps aren't the only ones. You stop. The sound stops. You take another step. A second step answers from somewhere behind you. You turn around. Nothing. This is the moment when most people would leave. But curiosity has a dangerous habit. It makes people walk deeper. And according to the stories, that's exactly what happened. The explorer continued. At the end of the hallway was a small room. Inside were old objects scattered across the floor. Nothing immediately supernatural. Nothing that could prove a haunting. But one object stood out, a chair, placed directly in the center of the room, facing the doorway, as if someone had been sitting there, waiting for whoever entered. And then came the detail that made the story famous. The chair was covered in fresh dust everywhere, except for the seat, the pattern. Now here's where the mystery becomes even stranger, because abandoned buildings naturally make strange sounds. Pipes contract, metal expands, water moves through walls, animals get inside, wind pushes doors. There are perfectly normal explanations for many supposedly paranormal events, but some stories are difficult to explain. People began reporting the same pattern, a sound from the basement, a door that was supposedly closed, and footsteps moving toward the stairs. Not away from them, toward them. Imagine hearing footsteps beneath your feet and realizing they're coming closer, slowly, one step at a time. Then they stop, right underneath you, and nothing happens for several seconds. Then suddenly, a loud bang comes from the other side of the door. What really happened? This is where we have to separate history from legend. There is no reliable evidence proving that a supernatural entity lives beneath this particular basement, and that's important because abandoned Soviet-era buildings are surrounded by countless rumors, and stories can change every time they're retold. A strange noise becomes a voice, a shadow becomes a figure, an abandoned room becomes a hidden chamber, and eventually the legend becomes bigger than the original event. But that doesn't make the place any less unsettling, because the real mystery isn't necessarily whether a ghost was there. It's this: why did people keep reporting the same strange experiences? Why did certain underground rooms become places nobody wanted to enter? And what happened there before everyone walked away? The climax. Now imagine returning to the basement one final time. It's late at night. The building above you is completely silent. You turn on your flashlight. The beam flickers. Once, twice, then goes dark. You hit it against your hand. Nothing. And somewhere in front of you, you hear breathing. Not yours. Something slow. Something close. You freeze. Your flashlight suddenly comes back on. The corridor is empty, but the door at the end is now open. You know it was closed before. You walk toward it. One step, 2, 3. Then you see something written on the wall. A message. Old, faded, almost impossible to read. You move closer, and just as you begin to make out the words, you hear 3 knocks behind you. Knock. You don't move. Knock. Your breathing stops. Then the final knock comes from directly behind your head. Knock. You turn. Nothing. Only darkness. And somewhere deep beneath the building, a door slowly closes. The question: maybe there was never a ghost. Maybe every sound had an explanation. Maybe the stories grew over decades because people naturally fear what they can't see. But there's one thing about underground places that makes them different. Once you're inside, you can't see what's behind you. You can only hear it. And sometimes, hearing something you can't see is far more terrifying than seeing a monster. So here's the question. If you were standing at the bottom of those stairs, and you heard 3 knocks coming from behind that door, would you open it? Or would you turn around and run? Because whatever happened in that basement, some people believe the place was abandoned for a reason.